some kind of meditation every day is there's volumes of mountains of evidence about how beneficial that is. And a lot of it is because it helps us get back into that ventral vagal state.
Welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Krissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today in this episode, we are discussing stress, anxiety, and depression. So tell me, Elwin, these are three big topics and very significant in our society today, and most people are affected by them. Can you go into deeper detail about their importance in our world today?
Absolutely. And I realized this episode, we're talking a little bit about something that everyone is already focused on and concerned about to some degree. But I wanted to give a new spin on it and also explain how it relates to health and well-being and feeling younger and rejuvenating yourself and reversing premature aging and all the things that we focus on. So yeah, one of the main reasons that we're focusing on this so early in episode 2 is because, especially stress and anxiety, I'll get to depression a little bit later and explain how it's interlinked. But with stress and anxiety, it's absolutely a significant, if not the most significant, causative factor for premature aging. Now, there's a certain type of stress. We'll talk about the difference between good stress and bad stress, I'm sure. But what we're really talking about with stress and anxiety is chronic stress and anxiety. And when stress and anxiety is lasting and habitual and a common way of being as opposed to a occasional way of being, then it absolutely is a major factor with premature aging. And we'll talk about, all the different ways that that occurs, I'm sure, in the episode, or a bunch of them. It's also implicated in pretty much every disease. Every single thing that people suffer with, stress is a factor. And so, I remember when I first started suffering with health issues when I was like 25, something like that. I went to a medical doctor. It was my first port of call. I've always been a conventional fellow, believe it or not. And he told me that all the issues I was having were likely just caused by stress. He did not explain what that meant. Any of the things which I'm going to be sharing, it's taken me, almost 20 years to learn in this episode. And then he actually asked me a question. He goes, "What are you going to do about it?" No recommendations, no advice, no anything, no breathing practices, all he did is give me a month off work, which was very nice of him. But I spent that whole month worrying, drinking coffee and doing everything under the sun to increase my stress. So
everything you're not supposed to.
So that wasn't that helpful, yeah. On a more profound level, because of course we're also about not just having a healthy body, but feeling good, it's a key fact in removing a spiritual connection. I would say the person who, to my mind, explains this extremely well is Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I'm a fan of. I know you are too, Krissy. And he really talks about how when you're in a state of stress, it means that all your energy and all your resources are putting you in a place where you're focused on survival. And of course, if you need to be focused on survival, that is exactly the correct thing to happen, right? Nature has built our bodies this way for a reason. But when we're constantly focused on survival, of course, what are we not focused on? We're not focused on social relationships, except for how they might impact our survival. And we're certainly not focused on, bigger things like, why am I here? And how can I contribute to the world? And what is the purpose of life? And how can I feel as blissful as possible and help other people feel that way? And all that stuff, that's generally not the focus of someone who's in a survival mode. And so, yeah, spiritual mode, social mode are very much in conflict with survival mode. And so, yeah, when we're constantly in stress, another great thing that Dr. Joe Dispenza says that I really like is that states like stress, anxiety, depression, worry, anger, irritation, frustration, these are not normal states of consciousness. These are altered states of consciousness, or at least they should be altered states of consciousness. But of course, for various reasons, which we'll definitely address in this episode, sometimes, or very commonly, as you said at the beginning, they become normal states of consciousness. They become what we do on an everyday basis, but they're not meant to be that. We're actually meant to feel some version of good as a neutral default state. And when I say meant to, that's a bit of a loaded term, meant to by who? Meant to by nature, meant to by God. I mean, we'll get into that as well.
Beautiful. No, that's really, really good. You mentioned some aspects about stress. I mean, is stress always bad?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I must admit that I made a mistake about this. Having understood how important stress was for so many of the issues that I just talked about, and it's very, if you're watching this video or listening to this podcast, you may well be thinking along the similar lines. Yeah, let's find out how bad stress is and what I can do about it. There is actually a type of stress which is really good for you. And I would say the person who really opened my eyes to that would be, as in fact he did to the medical community and the scientific community to some degree, is Wim Hof, right? Wim Hof, the Iceman, who really proved that temporarily elevating your own stress chemicals can actually allow you to do fantastic, incredible things, as he's proven, right? Climb up Mount Everest wearing only a pair of shorts, without any breathing apparatus, or running around in the desert doing a marathon in the desert without any water, or most interesting, I think, from a medical point of view, being injected with an endotoxin, which we talked about in the last episode, which would normally make people feel fluish and feverish very quickly and feeling completely fine. And it turned out that he does this through a process of a particular type of breathing, but basically by spiking levels of stress chemicals, cortisol and norepinephrine and epinephrine, which we'll talk about, which then massively increases the effectiveness of the immune system temporarily, and so helps a person to basically not get sick where they would otherwise get sick, at least within that particular laboratory controlled clinical environment. So I would say, yeah, there are absolutely benefits to stress, but the key thing is the difference. And then, of course, there's the kind of more personal growth aspects to things, which is those who habitually avoid any kind of stress kind of do it in an excuse to avoid anything that puts them outside their comfort zone. We were just talking about it before the episode starts, feeling a little bit nervous, right? Filming something, knowing it's going out there. And so, that's a good stress in the sense that we're challenging ourselves to do something that pushes ourselves outside of our comfort zone, our comfort limit. Another activity that's very stressful and constantly being recommended is exercise, right? Compared to the state of just lying around or sitting around, doing intense activity is stressful, but it's a good type of stress. But just with all of these, the key thing is it's temporary and then it goes away again. Whether we're stressed through cold water, whether we're stressed through exercise, whether we're stressed through, taking some kind of social risk or whatever it may be. These are not things that go on and on and on and on for hours and hours and hours throughout the day, every day. In fact, when they do, like with an athlete who trains hours and hours and hours and hours a day, they often get run down. Their immune system starts to struggle, and they start to even age prematurely if they're not on top of it, which they usually are. But just saying, right, even the good, so-called good stress, if it's excessive, is actually not good.
Yeah, and they of course have a team behind them trying to combat and that constant stress with whatever they're doing in there because of the impact that long-term impact is going to have, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's good studies about this where not training enough means that the immune system's depressed. Training the right amount means the immune system's optimal. Training too much, the immune system's depressed. So it's like literally the right amount of stress. And that amount varies so much. I know we're still in the theory section, not the practical advice yet, but people who are severely exhausted, for instance, that level that's too much exercise for them may be walking for 30 minutes rather than 20 a day. Whereas another person who's an elite athlete, it may be, doing extremely intense exercise for 4 hours instead of 3 hours, right? So it really varies a lot person to person, but there is that limit for every person where any stress, including exercise, can be too much.
So what is the connection between stress, anxiety, and depression?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I didn't just lump them together because they're the most common kind of mental health issues. So this is something that, again, I would say has made a huge difference to my understanding of being able to help myself, but also to really understand other people, to have empathy to other people, what's going on for them. And that is the understanding that we actually our nervous system actually has 3 modes and not 2. And so, and I feel kind of bad about this because, when I used to teach this back in the day, maybe a decade ago almost, I would teach the same as, what almost everyone else does, which is that the nervous system has 2 modes. It has the sympathetic, fight or flight, and then it has the parasympathetic, rest and digest. But this never sat totally well with me, even though I used to teach it because it was, the scientific understanding, because I always had that question in my mind, like, okay, when someone's depressed, when they're shut down, maybe even when they're in a catatonic state, what's going on? And so some people would say, well, that's actually a stress state. It's like when there's too much stress. And some people would say, no, that's actually an excess of parasympathetic. So when you're too relaxed. And neither of those answers really sat very well with me. And I think one of the reasons is because I'm even though I want these podcasts to be science-based only, not kind of speculative stuff, I am, fairly versed in some of the other systems that are more energy-based, like, for instance, an Ayurvedic system or a Taoist system. And an Ayurvedic system, they always talked about there being 3 kind of modes of being. So there was tamas, which is a dull, inert, kind of shut down state. And then there's rajas, which is a energized, stimulated, quite possibly overstimulated state, irritated, frustrated, that kind of thing, potentially. And then there is a sattva, which was a kind of enlightened state, or like a perfect balance between the two, where you're spiritually hooked up and all the rest of it. And so I'm sorry to all the people who are true experts in that, who feel like I didn't do it justice. That's just, my cliff notes. But in a nutshell. And so like this idea of 3 modes always stuck with me. And so then I came across something called the Polyvagal Theory by a guy called Stephen Porges. And even though it's called a theory, I, really treat it as if it's a fact, to be honest. And so he talked about there being not 2, but 3 modes of the nervous system, very much correlating to how I just described, at least the Ayurvedic system, even if someone might disagree with how I characterized it. So basically, we have 3 modes. The first mode, I'll do it in the opposite way around. So the first mode, the one that we should be in most of the time, is what he calls a ventral vagal mode. And ventral vagal, I suppose I should just explain this briefly. So we have our nervous system, right? So our nervous system is our brain, the spinal column going down, and then we've got all the nerves coming out of that, sending messages to every part of the body, and then also taking messages from every part of the body. And it's kind of the bit from a scientific point of view that controls everything, right? But then we also have these other nerves called the cranial nerves, which, all start, as you might imagine, with the name, in the head. And there is one particular cranial nerve, which is very significant, that a lot of people talk about these days. I think there's 12 cranial nerves, and I think it's CN11, cranial nerve 11, and it is the vagus nerve, or vagal sometimes. And so the vagus means the wanderer, and it's called that because it kind of wanders all the way down the body. It like works its way all the way down to like the hip area. And so even though it's only one of 12 of these cranial nerves, it has an extremely important impact. And so this is what this theory was looking at. So the ventral vagal mode is where we are relaxed, present, alert but not stressed, and sociable. That's how he characterized it specifically. Meaning, not withdrawn, not in that survival state or that like trying to get something state, right? Just social. And so that's the state that we should be in. Again, I said, where's the should come from? Well, so there's a biochemical scientific basis to the should, and it's the idea that we should be in this ventral vagal state. Now, when we have stress, including like the good stress I just talked about, the acute stress, maybe we've got an infection, maybe we need to move and exert ourselves, maybe we've got a challenge, whatever. We got colds, we got, heat, we got whatever, we got a challenge to our system. Then we go into a sympathetic mode. And so the sympathetic nervous system relates more to that spinal column that we talked about earlier. Now, it gets further divided because some sections of the spinal column, especially the middle, the thoracic section, are more sympathetic than others. But from this point of view, the whole spinal column is more of the sympathetic part of the nervous system. So what is the sympathetic mode? So the sympathetic mode is the actual fight or flight. So it's, different scientists and psychotherapists and psychologists and stuff have slightly different theories about this, but it's basically like you very quickly, this is all completely unconscious and automatic, right? But we ask ourselves the question, okay, there's some kind of threat. Can I fight it? Is the first thing, and win, or have a reasonable chance of winning. And then if not, can I run away? So that's the first thing that we're going to be running through. And so if we look at nature, if we think about an animal, most animals are prey animals, or to some degree, even if they're also predators. And so, but especially a pure prey animal, an animal that's not a predator, most of the time it's just like foraging or resting or playing, just chilling, basically, in this ventral vagal mode that we're talking about. And then sometimes there's a threat, right? They hear something in the bushes, they see something, and they immediately go into that mode, right? Do I fight or do I run away? And then they'll do one of those things. And then, when you watch nature documentaries, it's often interesting, right? These animals will just watch one of their, relatives or whatever get murdered by a lion or something. And then within a few minutes, they're back to just munching grass quite happily. And there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about. And it's, it's not a callousness at all. It's just that their nervous system kind of functions better than ours in certain ways. But so they deal with a threat one way or another, and then they go back into a ventral vagal mode. That's the point. But now imagine that the animal is in a situation where it can't run and it can't fight anymore. And an obvious example of this in nature is like an animal when it's actually being caught and it's in the jaws of the predator, right? And, I've got a dog, you've got dogs, Krissy. You might have had that situation where an animal has been caught before. And you might have seen that what often happens is the animal goes limp. It plays dead. And another version of this, if the animal hasn't been caught, but it hasn't got the energy to fight or run anymore, is that it just freezes, right? And so what's interesting about this state is it's kind of like a polar opposite of the sympathetic state. And so he calls this the dorsal vagal state, this third state, by the way, this play dead, freeze, go limp kind of mode. So first of all, when you go from ventral vagal to sympathetic, like a lot of things are upregulated. So breathing is upregulated, the heart rate is upregulated, and especially energy production is upregulated. So the body goes into, this is an emergency, let's stop all, luxurious, like we don't have to do them processes temporarily. Let's reduce the digestive process significantly. Let's reduce the detoxification system significantly. Let's reduce the reproductive system significantly. Let's reduce the immune system significantly.
Yeah,
let's just put all the energy into, first of all, get as much energy as you can and then put it all into be able to fight or run, which is, as I said, the muscular system, breathing, heart rate, stuff like that. Now, with the dorsal vagal mode, it's actually the opposite. So the pulse, the heart rate goes lower than it would be in the ventral vagal mode. The breathing is lower than it would be in the ventral vagal mode. The muscle tone is lower than it would be in the ventral vagal mode. We're now in a, pretend we're dead, pretend we're not here. Let's just keep our head down and hope that we survive, hope the predator or the threat leaves us alone because we don't have the energy to fight or run anymore. And so it is theorized and speculated that the depressed state, and again, I'm not talking about any medical condition, I'm not allowed to do that, and nor am I qualified to, but what the everyday depression is what I'm talking about, of, I just don't want to get out of bed today. I feel like I'm not capable of doing anything. The kind of idea of learned helplessness is like an example of this, where a person feels, I can't do this, I can't do that. Everything seems hopeless. Everything seems futile. There's this black pit of despair, all of this kind of stuff. That is, from this theory, and I believe it to be true, actually the dorsal vagal modes taking charge. And so that's where a person goes from initially, hopefully, unless we've had severe birth trauma, we all start off, engaged with the world and relatively relaxed. And then, for whatever reasons, I guess we'll cover it, we get into a state where we're stressed just too much, and for a while, and some people, and I think there's a strong genetic component to this, which we'll talk about, but some people, for whatever reason, they can stay in that jacked up, ready to fight, ready to run state for decades and get away with it. But others, For whatever reason, again, I think there's a strong genetic component to it, but there's definitely lifestyle as well, because the more you look after yourself, ironically, the longer you can get away with being in that jacked up sympathetic state, and before you run out of steam, before you run down. And so, yeah, things like chronic fatigue and stuff like that, I would also correlate to this. It's a down regulation of energy production. When it comes to chronic fatigue, they talk about how, the mitochondria doesn't produce enough energy. But then, why doesn't the mitochondria produce enough energy? And also, it doesn't produce enough energy compared to what we want it to, but is it producing actually the exact amount of energy that fits with the mode that the nervous system has chosen to be in, which is in this kind of shutdown, energy conservation. Let's hope the threat goes away, because we've been, trying to run away or fight from this thing for months, years, decades maybe, right? It hasn't gone away. Let's just try shutting down and seeing if that works kind of mode. Yeah. And so then we try and upregulate energy production by drinking coffee or taking, well,
there's tons of those energy drinks out there as well, or all those kind of things. Anything to kind of get that system going, or correct, things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was thinking of more like the healthy supplement version.
Oh,
so
right.
Take
more invigorating.
NR, or people who take PQQ or coenzyme Q10, like things that upregulate the mitochondria, but still, maybe mitochondria doesn't want to be upregulated when it's in this mode. Now, you can kind of force it to. And this also explains something to me that used to mystify me so much, which is why so many people, not everyone, but so many people seem to be addicted to stress, right? They seem to like almost get off on, not just in the sense of, as you just said, Krissy, taking stimulants and stuff like that, but even creating situations to their lives that will create more chaos and drama and stress, or I say this is mystified. It's mystified in myself as well. I don't want to, act like I'm better than that. I've done it too. But yeah, why people, including me, would do that, and why we would also, have a mentality of looking for problems and looking for reasons to be fearful. Why, people constantly check the news or whatever, things that are going to make them feel stressed. And I used to think it was just like some form of stimulation, which is kind of true. Mm-hmm. But again, why would you want stimulation? If you're in a ventral vagal mode, if you're already happy and relaxed and alert and present and spiritually connected and socially connected and all the rest of it, you wouldn't want stimulation. That would just be an irritation to you, which it is. Going back to the Ayurvedic system that I just said, Rajas, like things that promote Rajas activities and substances and all the rest of it, are considered to be bad because they overstimulate you and take you away from the meditative state, which is what they want to be in. It reduces that spiritual connection, which is more, the focus, but also that ability to relate on a true heart-to-heart level rather than a survival level. And so that really is the answer to me. It's because although being in a sympathetic state is a downgrade from ventral vagal state, it is a massive upgrade from being in the dorsal vagal state. And so this is, on a practical level, when I talk to a lot of people, I'm like, why are you stressing yourself out about this? Or like, why don't you just have a little rest, like in between what you're doing so that you don't exhaust yourself? They'll be like, oh, but if I stop, I'm going to collapse. And this is so I have to keep going. And this is a very real concern. And so the collapse is not only physical and energetic, although that's a part of it, but it's more psychological or emotional as well from this nervous system point of view. It's like, I don't want to go back into a dorsal vagal shutdown state, and so I'm going to keep myself going and going and going.
It makes sense, because that would feel better than being in that shutdown state, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, the shutdown state can kind of feel good in a perverse way as well, if like life has just been so hard. Imagine if you are just locked in a prison cell and you're being tortured every day, something horrific, then it's much better to be in that shutdown state than it is to be in that fighting, I can't get away state. In that situation, trying to fight and get away is unbearable, and being shut down is a blissful relief. So it does depend on the context and the situation. But yeah, from an everyday, there's nothing that bad going on around me, being in a shutdown state is kind of like the worst state. Especially when there's tons of stuff to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're also, this life in society today, or at least I find, it's just going faster. There's more coming at you. There's stress around money worries a lot of the time. So we're just constantly being, you use the word agitated. Our nervous system is just having that constant agitation. So it can be a lot to our whole body and our whole system when we're not meant to be in that fight or flight. That I'm going to use the wrong word, so you can correct me here. In that constant state all the time.
Yeah, no, fight or flight was right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm calling it sympathetic, but fight or flight, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. We're not meant to be in it, and I would say it is the cause of then eventually going into this shutdown, low energy, kind of called depressed state. Yeah.
So going back to just being in that, talking about the stress and the depression. And, I know there's a lot out there too about that people have a lack of motivation. They just, for whatever reason, they just don't know what to do and things like that. Why is it so difficult for us to get out of stress and depression?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so I think I've already answered in one sense why it's difficult to get out of stress, right? Because it's preferable to being shut down. But if I say, why is it so difficult to get into a ventral vagal state? Why is it so difficult to just be relaxed and present and socially and spiritually connected and able to operate without being jacked up in any way? And so, yeah, there's many different reasons for that. You really touched on one, which you're absolutely right about, Krissy, and that's the environment we live in now. As much as in the past, people sugarcoat, the past, and it's absolutely true. I think the chance of dying in violent death throughout a lot of our so-called civilized human history was like something like 1 in 3. Now it's like 1 in 10,000 or less, depending on your situation. People used to die routinely of starvation. People used to die routinely of childbirth. All this kind of stuff. So, in many ways, our life is way better. However, it doesn't feel like it is because of what you just said, that we're constantly bombarded with stimulus. So even among all the hardship that many of our ancestors suffered, it was kind of like a boring hardship a lot of the time, right? Like there wasn't like millions of things always coming at you. It wasn't extremely fast-paced. Most of our ancestors were peasants, right? Serfs, whatever you might call it, living in an agrarian lifestyle. Life is extremely boring. Like if you met a new person, it was like, like a really big deal, And so, again, maybe once cities became a major thing, that was less. But I'm saying, again, the majority of our ancestors, the majority of humanity. So, just like the prey animals that I talked about, even though there was barbarity and horror and all the rest of it, it was occasional. And most of the time, life was just very, very, very dull or tranquil, depending on your perspective, with not a lot going on. So that's one thing. Another thing, I just talked about ancestors, is genetics, right? In the previous episode on digestion, I talked about how some of us are more adapted to a high carbohydrate diet and some of us are not. So is actually the same with stress. And so the big genetic one I want to talk about is COMT. Because realizing this, and I want to make sure, please keep me that we don't spend the whole hour talking about this, Krissy, but
I'll keep you on track. I'll keep you on track. And yeah, you're going to have to please go into, and I know you will, telling us what COMT is.
Yes. Okay. So COMT is a gene. It's something that, not to plug our thing, there's other places you can find it, but if you go to Genetic Insights, then if you upload any of genetic test kits you've got from somewhere else, genetic test results you got from somewhere else, or you can buy a kit from us, you can get this result. But in the meantime, before you have that, just think about it, and you can think about how it might apply to you and other people you know. COMT is commonly known as the warrior gene. Now, I'm never sure if I say that right, but warrior with an A and warrior with an O. So
somebody who's going to be fighting and somebody who's going to be over there worrying about what's happening with the fighter, maybe.
Well, that is definitely what that name implies. I would actually rename that the warrior wizard, because they both have their strengths and weaknesses, but it's, commonly called warrior. So I'm going to try and rechristen that warrior wizard. But anyway, so there's 3 different modes of this, but there's, 2 extremes are the ones that are noteworthy. So the warrior one is so this COMT gene, what it does is it breaks down stress chemicals, specifically stress neurotransmitters, adrenaline or epinephrine, noradrenaline or norepinephrine, same thing, American and the rest of the world terms, and dopamine. Those are the main neurochemicals that create stress. There's also cortisol, which we'll definitely talk about, but that's a hormone. And so COMT breaks down, is a gene which relates to an enzyme which breaks down those chemicals. In a nutshell, actually, one gets converted to the other. It's complicated, but in a nutshell, simplify it, it breaks down those stress chemicals. If your COMT is fast, it means you break down stress chemicals quickly. If your COMT is slow, it means you break down stress chemicals slowly. And if it's in between, then it's in between. So the warrior type is someone who breaks down stress chemicals quickly. So from my perspective, they are someone who has adapted. Maybe their ancestors were more in a lot of wars, or at least adapted to being in them. They were more in traumatic, difficult, chaotic, whatever environments. And so they adapted to being able to break those stress chemicals down quickly. The other type, which I call the wizard type, which I'll explain why in a second, they break down those stress chemicals slowly. And so each type will tend to thrive more in a particular environment. The warrior type, as I just said, will thrive more in a chaotic, warlike environment, but the wizard type will actually thrive more in a peaceful, tranquil, not chaotic and warlike environment. The reason being because one of the stress chemicals that I just mentioned is dopamine. So dopamine is a stress chemical, but it's our pleasurable stress chemical. It gives you mental clarity, it gives you motivation, it gives you passion, it gives you energy, it gives you drive, it gives you desire. So, the kind of more standard scientific understanding of dopamine is that if we didn't have dopamine, we wouldn't bother doing anything unless we had to for survival, right? So it's like adrenaline, noradrenaline, like the negative motivation. I need to fight or get away from something. But dopamine is the positive motivation. I want that, right? I want this situation, this person, this thing, whatever. So it's that move towards motivation. But it leads to mental clarity and it leads to drive. So the wizard type has the issue that they do not break down adrenaline and noradrenaline very quickly. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they get more stressed than anyone else, than even a warrior type. It means it takes them a lot longer to calm down afterwards. That's the key distinction. There is a different genetic variant that means you're more likely to get stressed by things than someone else, but that's not this one. This one is how long does it take for you to recover once you are stressed. And so this also relates to psychological trauma, which we also, in Genetic Insights, we have a report about. And some people, they get more traumatized by traumatic things than other people. And when I say traumatized, I mean that, it sticks with them and it has a permanent impact on them. And this is huge, right? And I am that type, the wizard type, who gets more impacted by trauma. And for years, I was always so hard on myself. I was like, God, why does it always take me so long to overcome stress, right? I felt I was so delicate and I just hated it. I hated that part of myself. And then when I discovered that, and then I would look at other people who were so cool and calm, like a James Bond type that no matter, bullets flying around them, they're making pithy comments, right? And and I'd be so jealous, oh God, I really wish I was like that. But it turns out that cool and calm warrior James Bond type actually only feels good within that chaotic, dramatic, war-like situation. There's a reason I don't really watch the James Bond films, but I'm sure there's some things where someone's asking him to retire and he's like, no, this is what I do. And, and there's a reason for that, right? It's because that type really feels alive within that conflict or within that feeling of not feeling safe. And they feel bored within that context of
that makes sense.
When everything is safe, right? To them, it's boring. It's not tranquil and peaceful. Andrew Tate, who's extremely, famous at the time of recording this and got banned and all the rest of it, but most famous guy in the world for a while. He used to be a kickboxer, and I just saw a little quote of him, and he said, when I'm not fighting, I'm bored. That's the reason I fight. That's the only reason I fight. And I don't know, but I would be absolutely shocked if he doesn't have that fast COMT tendency. So that's the difference, right? And so a wizard type, the reason I call it wizard is because, it goes with the 4 archetypes, wizard, warrior, king, lover. But so that type is way more able to thrive in a situation where there is not stress because they're able to stay focused and motivated without a crisis, without some kind of major threat. And so they're the ones who can actually, get things done in peacetime, basically, and actually enjoy life as well in peacetime. And so I would say a lot of the stress going on in the world is between those two different types not understanding each other and having different agendas. Like right now, again, as we're filming this, there are certain factions, whoever you believe they are, that seem intent on bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. And it's like, some of us are like, why would anyone ever do that? That seems insane. But to a certain type, it's like, this is fun. This makes me feel alive, the fact that there might be a nuclear war, right? So again, I would speculate that's more the fast COMT types. Now, having said that, there's a strong genetic component to this, and we're not allowed to put it in the reports anymore, but we used to say that you can actually alter that. So I'm happy to say it in the podcast. And so there are actually substances that you can take which speed up COMT, and then there are substances you can take that slow down COMT. And this is really interesting to me as well. The substances that you can take that speed up COMT are, so speed up COMT meaning break down stress chemicals more quickly, right, are methylation donors. And then the substances that you can take that slow down COMT are flavonoids, which are these constituents in plants. Now, here's what's really interesting. Animal foods tend to be higher in methylation donors. The two biggest ones are choline and creatine, which are, way more animal food, or supplements, obviously, for those who don't want to eat animal food. And then flavonoids are, entirely found in plants again, unless you're eating the intestines of an animal that happens to have eaten a plant. So it's interesting. Now, it's interesting to me that throughout a lot of history, a lot of spiritual systems have advised a vegetarian or vegan diet. And I believe, I've never heard this said by anyone, but I believe that the reason for this on a practical level, putting morality aside for a second, is that, a spiritual aspirant tends to be put in a situation where, or should be put in a situation where all kind of everyday stresses are removed, right? That's the idea of an ashram. That's also the idea of a monastery, right? If we think of the Western terms, it's like, get rid of the everyday stress, so you don't have a job, you don't have ambitions, you don't have a career, you don't have all of that. Maybe you do what's necessary to survive in terms of cleaning and growing food and all the rest of it, but otherwise you have a fairly relaxed life. And then you slow down COMT more and more and more so that you can build up dopamine more and more. Why is that desirable? Because the higher your dopamine, the higher level of motivation. Then when you're praying, when you're meditating, you're going to be able to focus better, focusing on God, focusing on the mantra, focusing on whatever it is that you're focusing on. And you're more likely to have those breakthrough spiritual experiences. And then, conversely, most warrior cultures have tended to emphasize eating more animal foods. Now, I would say that is because by speeding up COMT and increasing the breakdown of stress chemicals, it makes the person even more warrior-like, right? It actually reduces their ability to get traumatized and overwhelmed and, not be able to cope with the level of conflict and danger that's around them. And so, ironically, if you had the spiritual people having a little bit more methylation donors using the warrior strategy, and then you had the warrior eating more flavonoids, which is the more spiritual strategy, you might actually get a little bit more balance. But unfortunately, whatever type we are, we tend to heighten that and exacerbate that. And of course, that could be appropriate in certain contexts, right? If you want a spiritual person to be really spiritual, they should have minimal methyl donors and maximum flavonoids. And if you want a warrior to be really warrior-like, then they should have minimal flavonoids and maximum methyl donors. But if you want a bunch of relatively balanced human beings in the world, then you might want to consider the opposite strategy a little bit more.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. No, I find that absolutely fascinating when you were talking about the genes and when we were discussing it, just because there's so many intricate processes within us all that there are so many different variations of what we have, what we don't have in certain processes. But I'm going to track back into stress a little bit more in the sense of how we identify it. I mean, what is the actual mechanism that causes stress or that we feel stress? I mean, for me, I know when I first started on my journey with stress, I didn't even know I was stressed until I wasn't stressed, or at least I was a lot less stressed. So can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, that's a good distinction. Just to comment on the last section, just as another sec, is I felt, for me anyway, it really helped with empathy and compassion for myself as well as other people, right? So to not look at other people and think that they're better or worse than you, but just realize that we're all different. And to me, that's one of the greatest gifts of the genetic reports, really, and why I want to share them with people is for that reason, to help to understand ourselves and other people and appreciate ourselves as we are. Yeah, in terms of what creates the feeling of stress and why we're sometimes not aware of it, well, I'll answer the not aware of it first because it's a bit easier. I think what you just said basically sums it up, is that we can only really experience things in terms of contrast. And so that makes sense in terms of all the different things that I'm going to get into in a sec. So meaning, if we're used to having a certain level, this is why the distinction that I gave earlier from Joe Dispenza, for instance, is so good, where I said that states like worry and anxiety and anger and frustration are not normal states of consciousness, they're altered states of consciousness. That's a profound realization. That's a great quote. I wish it was mine, but it's not. But it's a great quote, right? To realize that that's actually not normal. Or even if it's normal in the sense, as I just said, empathy and compassion for ourselves, it's not default. It shouldn't be our habitual way of perceiving and feeling and acting in the world. And so, of course, but as you said, it's hard to tell that you have something. Even, anxiety and depression is hard to tell if you don't know what, relaxation and peace and calm, or if you don't know what, motivation and enthusiasm are, if those are like distant states to you. But even things like anger, right? You see people, like, anger is so obvious to everyone around you generally because it's so, projecting outwards. But you see people who are like, I'm not angry, because that's their normal state of consciousness. So we can absolutely do that with everything. And so I'd say with that, what's really helpful is to have that outside reflection of someone else, to be honest, to give that contrast. And then if you don't want that or don't have that, the other option is to compare yourself to others, but rather they're in the way of what's wrong with all them, why can't they, or why, why are they so much superior to me, right? Rather than looking through either of those lenses, just go, okay, so this person doesn't start smashing things and screaming and shouting every time something goes wrong. Maybe I'm an angry person, or this person doesn't mope around and collapse as soon as something doesn't go their way. Maybe, do you see what I mean? I know those are just, I'm using very judgmental terms for the sake of humor, but yeah, that reflection of looking at other people can help.
Makes sense. It makes absolute sense. I mean, I know for me, when I was really in the middle of it, it just took one drop or one thing to be like, oh God, another thing. Instead of okay, we can deal with that. It was, so no, it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Overwhelm is, another great indicator that you're in a sympathetic state specifically, and then bordering on the dorsal vagal, right? That's like, if I have one more sympathetic agitation, then I'm going to go dorsal vagal, right? I'm just going to collapse. That's the situation of overwhelm, I would say. So what I think understanding the actual chemicals that cause the feeling of stress is really helpful. It gives us our first clues of what to do about it. But I'll cover them briefly because I'd like to do them more in depth in another episode. So cortisol absolutely gives us a feeling of stress. Cortisol is the main stress hormone, and I've always described this as cortisol gives you the feeling like there's something wrong, I've got to do something. Now, some people, through the strength of the mind and discipline and willpower and positive thinking and all the rest, they manage to scrub over that there's something wrong, but then they still have this loop running in their head of, I've got to do something, I've got to do something, I've got to do something. And so that's the person who can't relax, just be present, play, chill, have fun, all the rest of it. That's when cortisol is too high, but it can also happen when cortisol is too low, which I'll get to very soon. But that's when cortisol is not optimal. Now, there's also adrenaline and noradrenaline, also called epinephrine and norepinephrine, but I'm going to call them adrenaline and noradrenaline. So adrenaline is like a peak state chemical. Generally, if you have adrenaline running all the time, like high levels of adrenaline, you are probably going to collapse soon, because adrenaline is really meant only for not just states of threat, fight or flight, but really like peak states. And that's because adrenaline is partially tied to our acetylcholine, our ability to remember stuff. So stuff that vividly stays in our memory, whether it's a peak good experience like a birth, or meeting the love of our life, or a peak negative experience like some kind of trauma or horror, they unless we black them out, which again is more of a dorsal vagal thing, but often they're vividly in our memory, right? And so the reason for that is because adrenaline like really heightens our perception. We're like fully in the moment. Noradrenaline, on the other hand, and again, now, before I actually continue, I need to make it clear. I'm distinguishing what all these neurochemicals are, but the truth is none of them act in isolation. So all I'm kind of commenting on is from my reading and also my experience of trying increasing each of these and also reducing them, and then seeing what the difference is compared to before, that contrast thing that we talked about again. So noradrenaline is more that everyday anxiety, stress, frustration, like a heightened state beyond just there's something wrong, I've got to do something, the feeling of cortisol. It's like, I'm anxious now, right? I'm wired. It's that heart rate is increased, breathing increased, energy, blood flow is going to the muscles, all that kind of thing. So that's very much noradrenaline. And then there's dopamine. I know I already described that earlier. And then a lot of understanding stress is not just understanding the things that cause it, but also like stress is an absence of other things. So serotonin, for instance, is often talked about in the same breath as dopamine. A lot of people have heard of that through things like Prozac, which artificially reduce your body's ability to break down serotonin. So serotonin is that feeling of relaxed confidence. And I say that because there are various studies, especially more with animals, that show that a person is not only more relaxed, but also more socially engaged. So serotonin really relates to that ventral vagal state. And not just socially engaged, but also more likely to be socially dominant within a hierarchy, within a tribal structure. It will be found that the most dominant, like the alpha of the group, will have the highest serotonin. And then the, whatever you want to call it, the theta, the lowest level of the group, will have the lowest serotonin. Now, we could be confusing causation and correlation a bit here. We could just say, well, because they're alpha, they, are happy and therefore have serotonin. But it's also true to say if you artificially change serotonin, so if you increase serotonin, someone will start to act more dominant. They'll start to act more alpha, and vice versa. So it does go both ways. Now, there's also GABA. And so GABA is one of the main calming neurotransmitters. So think, with serotonin, we talked about Prozac. Oh, I didn't say the drugs. With dopamine, we're talking about amphetamine, cocaine, even coffee, things like that. Coffee, I'd say caffeine is a really good example of adrenaline and noradrenaline. It really increases those stress chemicals specifically by reducing another of the calming neurochemicals, adenosine. But anyway, GABA is related, like Valium is like a GABA thing. So that's more like the peaceful, relaxed, a little bit more of the checked out thing. We're talking a little bit more dorsal vagal with that. Although again, none of these work in isolation. At the worst, we're talking dorsal vagal. At the best, we're talking if there's still some other, dopamine with it and stuff like that, then we're talking like meditative. We're talking tranquil, peaceful. Basically, with large amount of GABA, it's impossible to feel stress and anxiety. That's why it's important when we talk about stress and anxiety. Oxytocin is totally a social engagement hormone, But it's also related to feeling satisfaction, contentment. A lot of people call it the love hormone. My experience with it is that that's true. And it does make people more generous when surveyed before and after taking oxytocin. It does make people more kind. It does make more people feel more bonded to those around them. And it actually, I saw this research just the other day for a group of men, a few dozen men. They did a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, gave half of them oxytocin. And the ones they gave oxytocin talked about feeling more spiritually connected at the time and even a week later, just from that one dose of oxytocin. So the researchers made a big point of saying that it doesn't necessarily have that effect on women. And oxytocin is a complicated one. We'll talk more about that with hormones. I reckon it does have that effect in women, but again, the study didn't prove it. But yeah, oxytocin does work differently in men and women a little bit. So oxytocin, but everything I just said is generally true for men and women. It definitely makes you feel more content, more satisfied. For that reason as well, they give it to people with addictions sometimes to reduce, because that feeling of emptiness, that feeling of not enoughness, which is often the root of addictions, gets temporarily. So I'd say it gets temporarily reduced by oxytocin. So I'd say it's less like necessarily going to make you super loving, like a full-on ecstasy MDMA thing, but it definitely makes you feel loved, right? And so it has really beneficial effects of reducing stress and anxiety. And in fact, the main stress hormone is cortisol. I would say the main relaxation, and again, ventral vagal hormone is oxytocin. And I call it ventral vagal because oxytocin and dopamine often go together. And oxytocin and dopamine are a really great combination. So dopamine means you're motivated, you've got energy and all the rest of it. But dopamine on its own, if you look at someone on methamphetamine, can make you like really, really hyper and over motivated, right? But when you have that oxytocin with it, that's like, I'm part of a team, I'm satisfied, I'm content, and yet I'm also motivated to do stuff at the same time. That's what that magic combination can do. And there's great research around people working together towards a common purpose, but as part of a team. How that, because feeling like part of something, belonging, is more oxytocin, whereas being motivated to achieve something is more dopamine. And so that's an example of how those two go together in a practical way. If you feel like you're all pulling together, whether we're playing team sports, whether it's armed services, whether it's anything where there's that, we've got a definite goal, but we're all in this together, that's a dopamine and oxytocin thing. Great combination. And then again, I won't talk about these much, but endocannabinoids and endorphins both have very important roles. Endocannabinoids give a sense of spiritual connection. I don't really know how else to describe it. They have all kinds of more practical benefits, like they can benefit the immune system, reduce inflammation, improve digestion, all kinds of stuff. But from the point of view of stress and depression, my understanding is that they really help with that by helping a person feel more spiritually connected, and also by not taking everything as seriously. So because of that spiritual connection, it's kind of, rather than being on a roller coaster, you're a little bit more centered, as it were. And then endorphins are especially relevant when it comes to depression. So there's a lot of research, that's not enough, but there's a lot of research. I would love more research on endorphins. I think they're fascinating. There is some indication that they're actually one of the most important, or the most important of all of the chemicals we're talking about, but way less research than things like cortisol and adrenaline and serotonin. But anyway, with endorphins, they give a sense of bliss, ecstasy, euphoria, like with high enough levels. But an absence of endorphins is basically pain, right? And so when life is painful, and that could be physical pain, but it could also be emotional pain, that's when we're, again, brief periods of pain, just like brief periods of stress, can be good for you. They help you to learn stuff, But if you're constantly in pain over the weeks, months, years, decades, then that can easily lead to that shut down, depressed state. And so again, people who boost their endorphins through various strategies, this is one of the reasons why exercise is recommended for people depressed. One of the reasons laughter is recommended for people depressed. Right. certain supplements as well, like DLPA, which gives the building blocks for some of the endorphins. They can help a person to feel. And so a person, especially if they're easily overwhelmed, if they very easily go into like crying and sadness, and so this is a thing. In fact, I saw this is a woman author who wrote this in this book. I can't remember her name. I'll try and find it and put it underneath. But she said that a lot of the conflict between men and women is actually that, because not a lot, but a significant part, because men tend to have higher levels of endorphins, and so they're more like, oh, what's your problem, right? Because they don't have that pain, and so they don't have that empathy. Whereas having less endorphins means that you have more pain. That means you have more empathy and compassion for others suffering. So yeah, there is an upside and downside to both. It's not like just having high endorphins all the time is great. That's going to mean that you're lacking in compassion. But that is a reason for one of those stereotypes of women being more emotional, especially at a certain type of the menstrual cycle. That's when those endorphins really crash. Obviously, it's not the only thing. The estrogen crashes and progesterone and all that kind of thing, but it's one of the reasons why that can lead to feeling more pain. And so again, I say that not in judgment, but for the sake of compassion, right? Anyone who's low in endorphins, and I had been for a period of several years, and it basically means you're in constant pain. It's awful. And so, and very common, right? By the time most people are, 70% of people by the age of 40 are in chronic pain, back pain and stuff like that. So this is really an epidemic, and this is why, opioids are such a huge thing. And yeah, we want to get into things that help to raise endorphins naturally, like low-dose naltrexone. I won't get into that. It is a medication, but it is a great alternative to any painkillers that, rather than depleting your own body's endorphins, actually stimulates the body to create more endorphins, which is a great thing, especially if you feel depressed.
It's so interesting. It's like what you said, and I really, it landed with me today, was having compassion for yourself and understanding actually what's going on internally within this plethora of neurochemistry that we have, that's not only impacted by our, what's going on in our daily life, but what's impacted by our genetics, by, the relationships that we have, everything else. So how can we actually test to see how stressed we are?
Yeah, it's a good question, because you talked earlier about it's hard to tell, and this is absolutely true. So I love doing a test for this. So the best test is a cortisol saliva test, where you do it 4 times throughout the day. You do it first thing in waking, kind of midday, late afternoon, and then before you go to sleep, something like that. And so this tells you your level of the key stress hormone, cortisol. I wish there was a good oxytocin test, so you could test that as well, but there isn't that I'm aware of. Often with the cortisol test, you get a DHEA test as well, which is kind of like the mother of hormones and helps with anti-aging stuff, but not super important to stress other than being depleted by it. So I haven't talked about it here. But yeah, a cortisol test is really the best thing. The other thing that can give a good indication as well is the thyroid. And again, we'll talk about that. I plan the next episode to be about hormones, and we'll definitely cover at least those two, the adrenals and the thyroid. But again, if the thyroid is in any way suboptimal, that is often an early warning sign that your chronic stress has become too chronic. Generally, because the adrenals are so important to staying alive, you get a downregulation of the thyroid first before you start to see significant issues with the cortisol. However, the point of taking the cortisol saliva test is that it is more sensitive, and so it will also give you an early indication. So those would be the two that I would recommend, that I would find really helpful. As to all the details and how to interpret them, we'll have to do it another time.
No, that's great. Thank you. And so with, stress, and as it is, what are the costs to us of maintaining such high levels of stress?
I'd say that a lot of the causes and costs are the same, right? One becomes the other. So, trauma of any kind, whether it's psychological, emotional, sexual, physical, like an injury, all of those can put us into that higher alert state. And then again, we talked about COMT being one of the things that can make it more difficult. But there are other factors. That's why we do also have the psychological trauma report about, the various different genetic factors that make it more difficult to come out of it. Now, the challenge is the more we're in that state of trauma, the more that we attract more situations into our life And you don't have to believe in any law of attraction kind of thing for this. It's just, literally when you are in that kind of sympathetic state, unfortunately, you tend to create more conflict and more issues than when you're not, because you're looking for threats. Because why wouldn't you? You're just trying to survive, right? But then, unfortunately, when you look for stuff, you're more likely to have more of it, at least within your experience, right? Even if not, maybe you don't believe it makes any difference in your reality. If you're constantly looking for threats, you're going to experience more threats, and that heightens the trauma even more. The trauma has an impact on kind of chronic muscular tension in the body, chronic fascial tension in the body, which then starts to create posture imbalances, which can then reduce the kind of blood flow, lymph flow, nervous system flow to various areas of the body. Like, it's endless. So we'll cover that in more detail another time, but trauma is huge. Nutritional deficiencies can actually lead to like this chronic stress state in some cases. But I would say more commonly, it's the other way around, where the chronic stress has led to the nutritional deficiencies. And then because there are nutritional deficiencies, it's not possible to recover from the chronic stress. So that's really important to find out about. And I know in this episode, we're going to do more practical stuff. So we'll cover all those recommendations at the end. Weakened immunity is huge. I touched upon this a little bit earlier. But basically, unless there is a serious threat, immunity is a luxury, and I'll explain that, right? If you hear a tiger roaring and you're not in a zoo, right? You're out in nature. Do you have time to be dealing with viruses? No, you just got to run away, right? Climb up a tree or whatever you can do. So that, hopefully silly example explains why the body might temporarily, largely, not remove, but reduce, right? Down-regulate immune system function. Now, what if you always feel like you just heard a tiger roaring? Then your immune system's always going to be not functioning correctly, right? And then, it's complicated, again, depending on largely genetic influences. Sometimes the issue is the immune system isn't fighting well enough, and then you tend to have more of these chronic infections. Sometimes the issue is that the regulatory immune system components are underproduced, and then you have more of the chronic inflammatory conditions, allergies and intolerances and pain and inflammation, all the rest of it. Sometimes you have both going on, so yeah, but all of that could be related to immunity.
I know in today there is so much out there as far as autoimmune diseases. Would that be, there could be some correlation here or some interplay in this space?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying. So when the immune system doesn't have enough of the regulatory components of the immune system, then the attacking pro-inflammatory components of the immune system start to become excessive, right? And then like you have a small issue, like a very minor infection, and then you get this cytokine storm, right? Which was in the news recently, and that can even kill you, Or on a more chronic basis, yeah, absolutely. Your body reacts to certain cells within you as if they're a foreign invader, and that's where you get, a heart valve being worn away, or you get lupus, or you get rheumatoid arthritis, or whatever. That's when the immune system is dysregulated. And absolutely, I would say stress is a huge part of it. However, you probably heard that before. The thing you may not have heard of is that my understanding, and this is not proven, but I think it's a good theory, and I think it's probably accurate, is that actually it's the impact of stress on the thyroid, which is more important. So it's actually indirect. So it's not elevated stress equals reduced immune system. It's actually elevated stress equals reduced thyroid function equals reduced everything function, including the immune system. So that's part of it as well. And again, that's okay if it's temporary, right? But if it's chronic, then that's where we can have a problem. And so, yeah, talking of thyroid, that leads us to the next one on my list here, low cellular energy, right? So when we have chronically high stress, we have low levels of energy for everything, pretty much, except for basic survival activities. And even those, after a while, get run down. But things like digestion, cellular repair, detoxification, reproduction, right? There's all kinds of issues with impotence, infertility, erectile dysfunction, all the rest of it. I'm not saying that's all down to stress. I think it's also down to various chemicals in the environment that people are choosing to take. There's a lot to it, psychological stuff. But a factor that's significant absolutely is still stress, and that think about it again. If you're being chased by a tiger, is that a good time to start reproducing? Even if you're in an environment where there's tigers roaming around, is that the best time to put a vulnerable baby, into the world, right? So, and of course, as far as our body's concerned, sex and reproduction are the same, even though maybe that's not the case for us in our minds. So, all that is down-regulated. The pineal gland also, talked about the thyroid earlier, is another one. Pineal related to serotonin, but also, especially melatonin and sleep. So our ability to get to sleep, stay asleep, and sleep deeply is severely impacted by stress. And then, of course, when we have that, when we can't sleep well enough to properly recover, then that leads to all the symptoms of premature aging, right? This idea of beauty sleep. So, that's a huge one as well. And then another one that's definitely, I would say, a cause as well as a consequence, but it is also a consequence, is poor lifestyle choices. So when I say poor, whether it's overeating, eating bad foods, taking drugs, gambling addiction, shopping addiction, workaholicism, all of these things, I can't think of any more, sex addiction, all of these things and many more, all these addictive, compulsive behaviors which are not logical, they're not rational. And if we really sat down and thought about it, we would say, that's probably not serving even my own best interest, let alone my family or my community, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
The reason we're doing this is, it's very easy to judge, again, ourselves, especially, and others. They're stupid, they're self-destructive or whatever. I'm stupid, I'm self-destructive, I'm lacking in discipline, I'm undisciplined, I'm lazy. But what it is really, again, from my eye of compassion, is not any of those things. It's someone in pain, as a lot of the addiction communities teach, who's trying to escape the pain. But what type of pain? A lot of the time, the type of pain, if the addiction is to more stimulating substances or activities, the pain they're trying to escape is being in that dorsal vagal state, right? And if it is more calming, addictive or self-destructive activities, then they're more likely to be in that sympathetic state. And of course, if it's both, right? A lot of people, coffee in the morning, alcohol at night or whatever, then it's the going between the two, right? In the morning, they wake up and they're in that dorsal vagal state because they're low energy because of everything we talked about. And so they need coffee to jack up the sympathetic mode. But then by the end of the day, they're jacked up, and then they need cannabis, alcohol, whatever, Xanax, these things to bring us back down again. And then ditto for activities, right? People who, voluntarily keep people in their lives who, create drama and stress and all the rest of it. Like, why would we have those people in our lives? Sometimes it's through sense of obligation and duty and all the rest of it, but sometimes it's just because life is boring without them. But again, what does boring mean? Lack of that sympathetic stimulation. So, there's a lot of things. It's not only substances, but there's a lot of lifestyle choices. Exercise is another great one, I know a lot of people who are very judgmental of people who don't exercise, but there's a good reason why some people don't exercise. And it's, again, because they're in that dorsal vagal state, and it's really difficult to get that motivation to keep going. That's one reason. Another reason is because they're in that dorsal vagal state and their energy is genuinely low, And so it's very, like, a lot of people, January comes or whatever, and they're like, I've got to get down to the gym. And then they do a bunch of exercise every day for 2 weeks, and then they get really sick. And then that's it again. They're not going to bother for another year, right? And is that a lack of willpower or a lack of wisdom? Possibly, but not to me. I mean, what that is a person desperately trying to get out of a dorsal vagal state, trying to feel better about themselves, trying to get things done, but in the process, because the only alternative to being in a dorsal vagal state is to be in a sympathetic state, and so they exercise in a sympathetic way, right? Rather than taking it easy to begin with, doing a bit of yoga, qigong, walking, whatever, they go straight into, treadmill, lifting weights, and then, they get ill or they injure something.
Yeah,
right?
hardcore. They go super hardcore.
Yeah, because that's the only option. And, I'm like that. I'm guilty of that. Like, sometimes my wife tells me to walk more slowly, and then I'm like, If I walk any slower, I'm literally going to fall over like a bike.
Well, you have really long legs, by the way.
That is true. But I walk quickly anyway, because I'm too much in that sympathetic state, right? That's what I wanted to acknowledge, right? So we all do it, right? Even with activity as simple as walking, rather than just, doing it in a relaxed way and having that broad field of vision and looking at things and like go, go, go. So it's a mentality and it's a habit that's very difficult to break because, talking about the brain, we have these, not only is there the existential physical reality why we might be in these states, but there's also the brain habituated reason, right? That these neural pathways we form to be in this mode are like very, very deeply ingrained the longer we do them. And it's very, very difficult to get into a different mode. Kind of another answer to your earlier question about why it's so difficult.
No, that's great. I mean, and thank you for giving us all the causes and the costs of stress over that period of time, because it really does break it down and we can see the impact. Because, I mean, that's always been the hard thing for me, is that understanding what the actual cost is, because it's not immediate. With all of that said, what do we do?
Good question. Well, I actually didn't put it in my little list here I prepared, but thinking about it, the first step really is awareness. So everything that we've been talking about today. So all the people who I, recommended that you learn more from, and probably more, like, get into it. Actually, seek to really understand it. Seek to see it in yourself. Do those genetic reports if you can to understand, what kind of type you are when it comes to these things that are crucial to stress and anxiety and depression. Like, really seek to understand yourself and understand this topic. I think that is important as a first step, because even if you did everything else I'm recommending, what I find is when people do things because they've been told to, or because they've been told it helps, rather than understanding why it helps, that's when often we don't have enough motivation to stick with it. And that's when, and then we just go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So I really recommend understanding the topic, which is why we've spent most of the episode helping with that. But anyway, go to more practical stuff. So yeah, practical stuff. Nutritional support. B vitamins tend to get really depleted by stress, by being in that sympathetic state specifically. And so I believe, this is pure speculation on my part, I've not seen any research behind it, but I believe that that's one of the nutritional reasons why we end up in that dorsal vagal state, is because we just don't, often the B vitamins get depleted first, or one of the first things to get depleted. And so then we don't have enough B vitamins to keep in that sympathetic state. Of course, the danger is if we take more B vitamins, we might get more easily into a sympathetic state again. But that's true of everything, most of the things I'm going to recommend. But yeah, so B vitamins I definitely recommend. Vitamin C is another thing that gets used up with stress. And so if you are in that chronic stress state, or if you have been and you're now in that depressed state, supplementing with vitamin C can be really good. Although vitamin C is something that you can get a decent amount of from food. B vitamins, if you're really depleted in B vitamins by stress, I would say supplementation is essential. You just, maybe, if you eat a lot of yeast extract, you can get it through a food form, but yeah, it tends to be tricky. Magnesium is another thing that really gets depleted by stress. And so I recommend supplementing magnesium. Again, it's not easy to get enough through diet. And then just in terms of, some of the things we talked about, 5-HTP is the building block for serotonin, which is one of the main neurochemicals that puts you in that ventral vagal state. And so giving yourself that building block can be really helpful. Take it at night, I recommend, because especially if you've been in that sympathetic, like full-on state, it can often make you feel tired and sleepy. Yeah, it just brings your energy right down. So good to have that before you sleep. And then on the other side, especially, so that's more for people who are identified with being in that sympathetic state. If you're more in that dorsal vagal state, the thing I'd recommend to you more than anything is tyrosine. So tyrosine is the building block for the catecholamines. So that's dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. And so, yeah, I would absolutely recommend. L-tyrosine is an amino acid. It's, again, in food. So some people who want to go natural say you should just eat a high-protein diet, and that is another thing to do. But not everyone can handle a high-protein diet, as we talked about in the previous episode. But if you can, if you're just looking for an excuse to eat a high-protein diet and it really agrees with you, digestion-wise and all the rest of it, then, yeah, eating more protein will also help to stimulate that dopamine via the tyrosine. So if you're the kind of person who cannot get out of bed for hours in the morning and you have the luxury of that situation, then having some L-tyrosine next to your bed can be really good. Either, ready mixed in water, or, just put it in there and drink it. And it's not necessarily as powerful as coffee, but it can be. Like I've seen, you know, a great health educator, one of the silliest things I heard them say was, I don't take L-tyrosine because I find it too stimulating, but I do have coffee every day. And I'm like, well, why would you start with the thing that kind of messes with your body's own neurochemistry rather than starting with a thing that's just a building block for your body's own neurochemistry, right? So L-tyrosine allows your body to make as much dopamine and the other energizing stress chemicals as it wants to make, whereas caffeine forces, it reduces adenosine, which basically keeps your system calm. So by doing so, jacks up all the stress chemicals temporarily. I also find L-tyrosine to be longer lasting. Caffeine, often you get the peak and then the crash, whereas L-tyrosine is more steady energy. And L-tyrosine is also the building block for thyroxine, which is your thyroid molecule, which is also crucial for energy. So yeah, big fan of tyrosine.
There's also... Oh, sorry.
Energy.
I was going to say there's also, and you made just a really great point there with these external chemicals like caffeine with like alcohol or cannabis as such, that there's a price that our bodies pay for metabolizing these things as well, instead of having the natural building block instead.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, in the case of caffeine, some people have more sensitivity to others, and we even do have a report about that genetic wise, but even let's say you're not sensitive to it, caffeine's not a huge one in terms of the toxic burden that it puts on your body, but some of them definitely are, right? Like alcohol and, you know, amphetamines and, a lot of these other substances, put a major, but I'd say caffeine also puts a major toll on the body, but it's really in the raising of stress chemicals, which then uses up all these nutrients that we just talked about. So you're going to be even more depleted in B vitamins, even more depleted in magnesium, even more depleted in potassium. In fact, all the electrolytes, you know, So I would say the issue of caffeine specifically is more in what it depletes you of, rather than like it being really difficult for your body to process. Now, having said all that, I do also recommend some herbs. You know, there's a bunch of them. So I usually start with the building blocks, like the ones I just gave, but there's no harm in doing the herbs, especially the ones that are, you know, harmless compared to things that contain caffeine that are a little bit more potentially harmful. I'm a big fan of like ashwagandha and ginseng and astragalus, things like that. Those are called adaptogenic herbs. Ashwagandha especially, I'm a big fan of the last few years because of its effectiveness at optimizing the level of cortisol, reducing cortisol, especially, like really good research to show that it's good at that. But yeah, all of those kind of herbs. And then also I like herbs like the lemon balm, passion flower, the ones that valerian, the ones that just help calm you down in the evening. So big fan of having those adaptogens early in the day, and then the kind of calming ones later in the day. Lifestyle changes, so sleep, obviously. Now, this is a thing where I know how frustrating it is to be in a highly stressed state and be told you should sleep more or sleep deeper when you can't, right? So I'm not saying it's going to be easy necessarily. This is why things like 5-HTP and lemon balm and passion flower and stuff, they can help with that potentially, as can, you know, all the usual habits that are recommended of not having devices, darkness, you know, a few hours before bed, all of that stuff. I'm sure you've heard all that stuff before. And if you haven't, I'm sure we'll do a sleep episode. But yeah, making an optimal sleep environment and then like just supporting yourself to sleep. I think the main thing is the mentality, right? If you have a mentality of I should be fine in 5 or 6 hours, again, because some hero of yours has managed it, that's fine. There is a small subset of people who genetically really don't need much sleep. There's a lot more people who don't have much sleep who are delusional from my perspective, but there are those people who genuinely don't need it. But again, if you identify with being in the sympathetic state or in the dorsal state, you need it, right? You need 8 hours sleep a night. You may even need more if you're really depleted. So yeah, sure, if you're in a ventral vagal state, if you're like optimal all the time and you feel better on 4 or 5 hours, good for you. But most of us, 8 hours sleep. Rest, play, you know, so actually prioritizing these things. I put in play and relationships in this list because, you know, it's not just rest as in, you know, doing nothing, or a lot of people's rest ends up being like watching TV or, you know, stuff like that. It's social engagement, having fun, because getting out of that ventral vagal state, remember, getting into that ventral vagal state is not just about relaxing. Relaxing can actually be the opposite. It can be going into dorsal. It's about being socially engaged, being present. And so, activities that do that are really great. Hormonal support. So we're going to talk about this way more in the next episode, but so I won't spend much time on it, but supporting your adrenals, supporting your thyroid, and then possibly considering supporting oxytocin as well. As we talked about, that's a really big anti-stress. The main anti-stress hormone is really significant, but we'll talk about it next time. Going more into the kind of functional medicine, naturopathic kind of world, resolving underlying toxicity and chronic infections. So let's do infections first. Chronic infections tend to only exist in areas of the body that are not really, from a medical point of view, inside the body. So that's basically your sinuses, your mouth, your digestive tract, to some degree the urinary tract, and then the skin, right? So fungal infections in the skin, bacterial infections in the intestines, bacterial infections in the mouth, fungal bacterial infections in the mouth, or indeed even the lungs. When these can be there chronically from a medical point of view, meaning they're just there and the immune system hasn't fully dealt with them. But the fact that they're there, like the mouth is the most common one, almost everyone has an infection in their mouth, means that the immune system is constantly putting the nervous system on high alert. We've got a threat, right? It's an invasion. We've got an invasion going on. It's not a tiger, but it's still an invasion. It's still a threat. It's still a reason why we need to be on high alert. So, it can be impossible to get out of that stress state without dealing with underlying chronic infections. And ditto with underlying toxicity. If you've got a high level of, say, mercury or cadmium or lead in your system, this can make it impossible to get into a ventral vagal state. Right. Absolutely impossible. So those things, if you have them, and it's worth testing to see if you have them. This is one of the biggest things for me. Won't go into it in this episode, but I found out I had lead toxicity, rather severely high. Still have not found out why I had it. It's, because I found out, I was able to treat it. It's the most difficult of all the toxins to treat, unfortunately, in that it just takes ages, but it's still way lower than it was when I discovered it. And I felt better, right? And now, again, as I said earlier, I used to be so hard on myself for, how easily overwhelmed I was compared to, say, my role models. But when you have as high level of lead in your blood as I did, it's extremely difficult to be in that relaxed social space because your body's on high alert because you've got a poison floating around in your bloodstream, right? So you got a poison floating around in your bloodstream. You got you got an infection that's just sitting in there in your body, constantly ready to create more trouble. That needs to be addressed. Practices. So again, I won't go into this in huge detail, but breathing practices. So the way that the three states I just talked about each have a very characteristic breathing pattern. The dorsal vagal state is very much a restrained kind of breathing and from the chest. The sympathetic state is more a situation of over-breathing, like a hyperventilation, again, usually from the chest. Whereas the ventral state, the ideal state, is more a calm, continuous breath from the belly. So that's kind of like the goal that we want to get to, but often just trying to breathe calmly and continuously from the belly is very difficult if we're in a stress state. So often we need to do an intervention breathing first. So whether it's something like Wim Hof method, which is really great, whether it's something like Buteyko breathing, which is really great, or whether it's some kind of classic yogic breathing of some kind, pranayama, anything that kind of intervenes with the way that we habitually breathe and shows us how to breathe naturally and especially encourages us to breathe from the belly is a really good thing. Meditation is a really great thing for stress. In most cases, I've seen some evidence that, especially if it's the kind of more introspective type of meditation, if you're already anxious and you start focusing, say, on the sensations in your body, your anxiety might just get heightened. So that can be a little bit tricky. And so that's where, if that's the case for you, maybe it's less mindfulness and maybe it's more like a guided meditation. Already mentioned Joe Dispenza several times. Krissy and I are both a fan of him, but there are many, many types. And then you could go for some kind of mantra where you keep repeating a mantra over and over. There's like where you're focused on I think they're called yantra, where you're focused on something like with your eyes, basically. like something to focus on other than how anxious you feel or how depressed you feel, or whatever, can be useful in those cases. But some kind of meditation every day there's volumes of mountains of evidence about how beneficial that is. And a lot of it is because it helps us get back into that ventral vagal state. It helps that we haven't talked about this yet, but the different brain waves. So being the stress state is like this high beta brain waves. And so we want to get into more of the low beta, where we're just relaxed and present. And then to do that, often to go into really theta or delta, to go into that actual meditative state temporarily, that helps us to then be in a relaxed but present state. And body work. Body work is huge. Body work has really been the thing that's made the biggest difference to me, for reasons that are probably too complex to go into. But the reason why it matters is because from a functional point of view, a lot of stress and trauma is stored in the body. Now, again, the pure science medical types might argue that a little bit and say it's actually in the brain. Fine. Even if it's in the brain, it's expressed in the body. So we have these habitual patterns of holding the body, like maybe this, for instance, like this is like a protect ourselves state. So if our posture is like this, it's not possible to be in a relaxed, present ventral vagal state, right? And so doing different kinds of body work that helps us to become aware of those habitual patterns of how we hold the muscles in our body, and then to actually transform that, is great. There's all the kind of standard stuff, which if it works for you, great, like yoga and Pilates and martial arts and and then where people work on you, trigger point therapy, deep tissue massage, etc., etc., etc. The things that I found to be most powerful to really undo that deep trauma are somatics is really good for people who are able to work on themselves but need something relaxed. Bioenergetics is really good for people who are able to work on themselves but who want something a bit more invigorating and energizing. And then I would say counter strain is really good for people who prefer to have someone work on them. So those would be my recommendations in terms of body work. And then lastly, if you're in a stress state, it's very easy to feel like you're all on your own and that it's all down to you. And so again, that ventral vagal mode is about this social reaching out and feeling like it's not all down to you and you're not all alone in the world. And so get help, right? So all the stuff I've talked about, whether it's a nutritionist to help with nutrients, whether it's a herbalist to help with herbs, whether it's a coach to help with lifestyle changes, whether it's a hormonal doctor to get your hormones sorted, whether it's a functional medicine or a naturopath or whatever to help with toxicity, whether it's a breathing instructor, a meditation coach, a bodywork specialist. And then also, when it comes to stress, therapy, right? Psychotherapy, counseling, coaching, whatever modality works for you. If you just want someone to listen to off gas, then counseling is maybe more suitable because it tends to be cheaper and easily available. If you're more like someone who has to feel like they're achieving goals, then coaching may be useful. And if you're someone who wants to kind of like find out what's going on inside you, then therapy might be more useful. But and how you relate to other people and stuff as well. I guess that's therapy too. But asking for help, getting help, rather than feeling like you've got to work it out on your own. Now, of course, this channel and this podcast is dedicated to people who want to empower themselves and not be dependent on others. And we 100% support that. But not being dependent on others and not feeling like you just got to do whatever this authority tells you is one end of the extreme. The other end of the extreme is you've got to do everything on your own and you can never ask for help. And so the in-between in that is I am ultimately responsible for my own health and well-being and happiness and destiny and all the rest of it. However, I'm not an expert in everything, and it would be great to get help from as many people as I can who know what they're doing and who can help me to be the best I can be. So yeah, reach out and ask for help. Just the act of reaching out and asking for help will stimulate more of that ventral vagal system.
Beautiful, Elwin. Thank you. This has been very insightful and very informative. And I think, what you just said there as well at the end, this is about empowering everybody to know that they have something that they can do. There are ways to look into it for themselves so that they can feel better. And just want to say to all the listeners and everybody that's joined us, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time. And if you like this, then make sure you hit the subscribe button. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwin has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code RejuvenateMe for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net.